So you clearly don't see eye to eye, which is why this lawsuit is now moving forward. Um, what are your thoughts on her rationale behind sending? She says she was uncomfortable, seeing them on display. They didn't really belong to in museums or whatnot. What are your thoughts on that? Because some people may actually agree with her and say, yeah, maybe Africa is the rightful home for these artifacts.
Yeah, well, what I think is that there's a lot of information that is unknown, but she is responsible for knowing. And I've engaged in conversation with her, and it did appear that she was unaware of the history of the relics, how most of them that the museum, that the Smithsonian has, are coming from what we call slave trade blood metal. These manillas that were exchanged for humans, right?
Mhm.
These were melted down, and most of the relics that you saw in that segment are coming
Yeah.
from this time period. So we were sold, I mean, for 300 years
Yeah.
for these relics to be made. So these relics are the embodiment of our ancestors.
Mhm.
Yes, there was some harm that occurred when the bronzes were removed from the Benin Kingdom, but even that narrative is not presented accurately. One part of the story that's often left out is that the Benin Kingdom massacred 250 African porters and 9 British Navy officers who were unarmed, coming into the Benin Kingdom to meet with the Oba of Benin regarding their violation of trade agreements for palm oil. Okay, that's left out because if folks knew they massacred all these folks, so many of them Africans, in fact, they might think a little bit differently about the removal of the bronzes. But for our purposes, we don't even have to discuss the 4-month war that took place that ended up with the Benin Kingdom being destroyed and these relics being taken to pay for the war that they initiated. We can just focus on the 300 years that the Benin Kingdom looted our villages, stole us, and sold us for the metal they needed to make these relics. And so that alone should give pause for any decision or discomfort with bronzes hanging on the wall. Those bronzes were right where they belong because most of the descendants of enslaved Africans enslaved by the Benin Kingdom are right here in the United States. 40 of the 400 million of us, 93% of us have DNA from Nigeria. And what we know from studying the transatlantic slave trade data is that the Kingdom of Benin controlled much of the waterfront involved with the slave trade in the area that's called Nigeria today. Now, Nigeria did not exist at the time of this punitive expedition. Okay, right. It happened afterwards. And we know the British were engaged in colonizing Africa, but colonialism was only possible because the Benin Kingdom sold off all of their strongest warriors to European slave traders, including their business partners, the British, who came in and wanted some level of control over the trade in palm oil. So bottom line is she is very misinformed, Mrs. Blackenberg, and she acted as if she never heard of a manila. Now that was shocking to me. And in fact, when I was in a meeting with her, I just burst into laughter when she said that, because how could someone who is the director of one of the most iconic, a museum holding one of the most iconic collections of treasures anywhere, not know about the manillas being the source of the metal for the bronzes. Then I looked a little further after the meeting with her and her archivist, and I saw that their own website acknowledges that these manillas were melted down to make the bronzes. Not only that, but there's books that are published by the Smithsonian that acknowledge this history. So either she was being dishonest with me, or she was not well informed and giving away relics inappropriately. So I suspect that the reason why she has been forced out of the Smithsonian is one of those reasons. Either she was being dishonest, right, or and insensitive, or she, was being unprofessional, and they realized that she was managing treasures that she doesn't really know enough about.
But how is one person able to, kind of be successful in handing over such a treasure trove of not just history, but a valuable history monetarily too? How is that even possible? These things don't just happen in a silo. Obviously there's a board that has to approve it. I mean, the Smithsonian board did approve it. As a matter of fact, it's that, and they did this during a ceremony. I'll read this real quick. During a ceremony on October 11th, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art transferred ownership of 29 Benin bronzes to the National Commission of Museums and Monuments in Nigeria. The bronzes, which were part of the museum's collection, were stolen from Nigeria. We know that part. But it says the Smithsonian's Board of Regents voted to officially remove the bronzes in June, in keeping with the Smithsonian's new ethical returns policy. So, so how, you know what I mean? So or is she a scapegoat? I mean, yeah, personally, obviously this, this isn't sitting well. But if this wasn't sitting well, why would the board approve it?
Well, it's because it's probably because they didn't know the history. I believe, first of all, the Board of Regents has the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, sitting on it, and the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. What probably happened is they received the same kind of misinformation that she conveyed to me. But what I did was I shared with her all of the scholarship, all of the scholarly writings, all of the documentation that she needed to know the truth about the origin of the relics, which included, of course, that these manillas were mined in Germany, and so Germany had been the supplier of these relics for 300 years. So she had all of the information, and she ignored it. Okay, so now how could she get away with that? It is the vestige of slavery, of discrimination, the dehumanization of the experience of descendants of enslaved Africans. And I get emotional over this. How could they hand over relics they knew we were enslaved for 300 years? It's an outrage. It's an outrage. And so this is why, the case is still pending, and we anticipate success. There's a couple of other things going on around the world that are also pointing toward our success. We were not able to stop the transfer at that moment of the bronzes. The judge was on a learning curve, just like the rest of the world. Our part of this history, our connection to these bronzes, has been suppressed for 126 years. No one has been sharing that information. No museum shares that information anywhere in the world. And that's why we had to do the film. That's why we continuously speak up on this issue. It's a tragedy that's happening, but there is hope. There is hope because here we are on your show, and you're going to share this information to the world. But we believe that the Smithsonian will have a change of heart with the next group of relics. I don't think they're going to go anywhere because now the truth is known. And once again, I think, just looking at the fact that Ms. Blackenberg has been pushed out of the Smithsonian is an indication that they understand the importance of these relics to 93% of descendants of enslaved Africans here in America. It's not just us. 83% of Caribbeans have this DNA from that region. And we do the DNA testing because we want it to be clear. This technology is only available today. That's why we can only make this argument now. We couldn't have made it 126 years ago. But it's only available now, so we know who we are. so we can stand up and say, here we are. This belongs to us. It belongs to all of us. So this is
Yeah.
where that title is coming from.
Yeah. So, what are the chances of these bronzes coming back? Is that basically, which is basically what the lawsuit is asking for? Uh, do you think? I mean, now that they're on the other side of the world, do you think that Nigerian government will return them?
Well, they're not all on the other side of the world. Believe it or not,
Mhm.
the government, the Nigerian government, left 9 of them on loan. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
9 of them are still at the Smithsonian, plus an additional, I think it's an additional 30. So there are 39 of these bronzes that are still here.
What
So
about what about the ones that are there? Will
well,
they?
well, it's
Is that
it's unlikely that they're going to give them back. I mean, they're under the control now of the Oba of Benin, and so we don't expect to get any of those back. No, absolutely not. But what we want to do is to make sure that no other relics are transferred without an opportunity for all of the heirs of these relics to sit down together and discuss how they are displayed, where they are displayed, and also we want descendants of enslaved Africans all around the Americas to have different types of opportunities with the bronzes, to do internships, to study them, to research them. There's so much we don't know. Like, we don't know how many people had to be enslaved for any of these relics to be made. I think that's very important research that we should have. It should be done. We need to know, when folks were being enslaved at a particular time. These relics do tell a story of an Oba at a particular time. For example, these Oba heads tell you which Oba it was that was deceased and the head was dedicated to. So we can learn a little bit about which groups of people would have been enslaved at this particular time, which region of Africa, the Benin Kingdom or the surrounding areas they pillaged, where we were coming from. So there's a lot of our history that we can determine when we know more about the relics. We have to have access to them. We want employment opportunities in this institution because there's not enough of us. We want more of us to go to these institutions to see these relics. I think more African Americans will be interested in museums in general, knowing that our blood money is hanging on the wall, reconfigured as bronzes. So there's so much to learn, and what we're also hopeful for is the opportunity to engage in healing discussion with the descendants of the Kingdom of Benin, because we do share history, and they're symbolized in these relics that we paid for with our lives, and we still pay for with our lives, and that they actually cast into these relics. But we do not believe these relics should be returned without our engagement in a discussion and agreement, because it would just be a second opportunity for them to profit from enslaving us. Okay, it's just completely the opposite of what anyone wants to accomplish.
Yeah. So, I mean, if considering their worth, and considering the argument of reparations, could they be somehow used as a tool to argue for reparations? Could they be once again traded instead of handing them over? Can African Americans here use them as a tool to gain reparations monetarily? Is that even something to consider? How could you actually? Is it possible for African Americans here to benefit from the wealth from what they're worth, rather than going to the museums? Because let's say they are in museums, sometimes you pay the money, you go beyond just the knowledge you get. Could they be used in other ways for reparations and our benefits?
Absolutely. The relics are, first of all, restitution is what we're demanding. Okay, this
Yeah.
demand that we're making is called restitution. Restitution is a part of the reparations demand. It's the return of something that belongs to you.
Yeah.
And so these manillas were payment for us. That means that, we should have been paid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to make the decision to be uh, uh, exported or imported.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's one level. Okay, so it's restitution. Aside from that, yeah, there are many agreements that the Benin Kingdom, or actually it was Nigeria, established that actually requires payment for loan and exhibit fees. So they're getting paid. A lot of these relics that are being left at museums, they're being paid for, and we should get a portion of that. That would be in a trust fund. That would be a first reparations fund. And we believe, the president of the United States, who campaigned in support of reparations, we feel it's an opportunity for him and the vice president to make good on their promise for reparations. If they took those 39 relics that are still floating here in the United States, owned by the Smithsonian, and established a trust or some kind of payment system or whatever, fundraise to give to a trust fund for descendants of enslaved Africans, they could create a first reparations fund. And of course, this fight is not just here at the Smithsonian. We are holding up transfers due to due diligence requests. We put in claims at 107 different institutions around the world for co-ownership of these relics. So all of them know, any of them that are paying the Benin Kingdom, Nigeria, they know that we are demanding a share of whatever the benefits of co-ownership would bring. Yeah.
And that's still possible.
Oh, absolutely.
For the ones
we're
that
in negotiation. We're in discussion because there are laws being violated. There are laws being violated. They're required to engage in due diligence.
Yeah. I find it so interesting that this story is so much buried. It's not mainstream news. I mean, it's not all over the news. It's a little footnote in so much that's happening around the world and in our country. But yet, it is so important, especially when it comes to African American lives here. Anti-Black sentiments, not just here, but all across the world. I mean, we're still in a struggle. We're still in a fight. So I'm just very surprised that this particular issue, considering the magnitude of it and all the different elements of it, from even the history of enslavement and the accountability the Nigerian government, or before it was Nigeria, has to take for its role in the slave trade. I find that so very interesting. It seems like people are very uncomfortable talking about the African role in the slave trade.
Yeah, I cannot explain to you what it is, why it's not being picked up by the media more here in the United States. But I think that it's probably for African Americans who are uncomfortable discussing the issue. It's kind of like, that abused child who's abused by their parent, how hard it is to tell that your mother has abused you. It's hard to face that. And I think for us, to be rejected by our motherland, it's very painful. And to know that, that it's Black people who played a role in enslaving us. But the reality is that is what happened. I mean, there were some who were engaged because they were forced. I mean, we did research and we know there were some kingdoms that were forced to sell. But the Benin Kingdom is not one of them. In fact, they did much worse than sell us to a certain extent. I mean, they used us for human sacrifice. That's highlighted in the film, which goes to show you that there was no pressure to sell. I mean, if they had a choice to sell and sacrifice, they to sell or sacrifice, they probably would have sold us all. But no, they were engaged in an activity that they chose to do. It's painful, but it is the past. The heirs are different people, and we hope that they prove that by sharing the relics. We want them to show that they are different from their ancestors. And I think that's the evidence that we need, that they can say, that was our ancestors, that was then, today it's different. We understand how these relics were made, and we're going to share them. I think that that would be the ultimate sign of humanity and progress and unity, Pan-African unity for Black people.
How likely do you think that is going to happen, considering really our new world order? It's all about capitalism. You know, this is capitalism rules. I cry for humanity every day. What do you think? Do you think you know, the Nigerian government, or that they would actually, consider that? You know, how lucky do you think you'll be?
Well, the Nigerian government did not consider it. And of course, when the leadership changed over, there was a declaration by the outgoing president to transfer ownership and control of the bronzes to the Oba of Benin. So everywhere in the world where there's a bronze, the Oba is in charge of it and claiming it. And according to the government of Nigeria, they own it. So do I feel more optimistic about the Oba than the Nigerian government? Yes. I believe that if they don't recognize that we need to work together and share these relics, that we are all going to lose them. I do not believe that the European nations that are controlling these relics will return them to an individual who, according to, for example, Germany, who has transferred, 20 recently and have about 1,000 more, says that the Oba can dispose of them however he wishes. There is unconditional control assigned to the return of these relics. And so German citizens are outraged who know that these are slave trade relics. And others who learn the truth will be equally outraged that one person can get $30 billion worth of slave trade relics to keep for himself when he, in fact, is an heir of slave traders, and these are the slave trade blood money.
Yeah. Can you briefly explain what the Oba is?
The Oba is the king of the Kingdom of Benin.
Okay.
He is not considered a person. He is more considered godlike and very respected by the people of Nigeria and many others. I mean, I would have to say that the Oba, as far as I'm concerned, has been honorable in dealing with us. Initially sent an advisor to sit with us to hear our claim, and the comment that I received, during a meeting was that we have a legitimate claim. Okay, and I felt that was hopeful. And we talked about, and it was me and his advisor, Pedro Leyuola, who is one of the first women to learn bronze casting. The other woman is her mother, and her mother is the daughter of the Oba who initiated the campaign to return the bronzes. He was an Oba in 1933. So these are the only two women who know how to cast bronzes. But Peju was the advisor that I met with, and this was the outcome. But we thought about how wonderful it would be for our children to share and to acknowledge our shared history in these relics. And we wanted to pursue institutions that would help to educate, because this is a tough issue. It's tough emotionally, and it's just complicated, just the history of it. But the resources that were initially proposed were pulled, and the government just never expressed interest in pursuing anything.
Before we move on to our question of the day, is there anything I have not asked you that you think is important to note about this case, about the lawsuit and the Benin bronzes?
Well, I think, the governments who engaged in returning or repatriating these relics are actually engaged in actions that are like white man's burden. they think that it's okay to return these relics to anybody Black, just let's get it out of here, But it's critical that they take the time to understand who are the proper beneficiaries of these relics, to take the time to bring us all together, because they are in power to do that, and to ensure that we all have a say in what happens to these relics, because ultimately they become less valuable to us all if any party is not included in the process.
Yeah. I think when you spoke earlier about the uncomfortable truth about slavery, at least on the African role in slavery, I believe that will also open the door to just more understanding of our role, and so that way we can really legitimately move forward and do our best to get to the other side of these issues. I mean, I highly doubt it'll happen in my lifetime, but I think the history, I think how you speak so poignantly about the Benin government's role in slavery, I think that is very important. We rarely hear about that. It's an uncomfortable truth that perhaps we have to hear in order for us to truly work our way to the other side and have a come to Jesus moment. And that way, folks do reach out to other institutions like the Restitution Study Group before they make such decisions with this type of information in mind, because it will certainly give you pause, like, well, do we really want to do that? That's very important, because I was clueless about the significant role that they played. We see it in like movies like the Woman King, but it really it kind of softens the blow a little bit, because it's still such an uncomfortable and such a sensitive topic. We're still hurting. I mean, when I watch the short film, I can't even look at it, because I get very emotional. I get very emotional. I get emotional about the things that happen every day to Black people. I get emotional about what happened to Rasheed Carter in Mississippi. I mean, I'm emotional about what's happening to so many of us. It's just it's a tragic thing. But let's move on to our question of the day, and this is about power. Which is very important. So the question of the day, let me get this. So the question of the day is, what does African American soft power mean to you? But before you answer that question, let's hear how Ms. Blackenberg answered this question when it comes to Africa soft power.
Absolutely.
My name is Blankenberg. I'm the director of the National Museum of African Art. What is soft power? So soft power is the ability to influence without money or force. And we manifest soft power through culture, through sport, through music, and through art. And for the institution that I direct, soft power is really important, because it's how we bring together African Americans, global Africans, African peoples around the world to share our values and ideas and our creative imagination, to create regenerative art ecosystems, influence others just to not but by some very fundamental and important African values that drive us.
So one of the things that I really admire about you, Deidre, and the work you're doing is that you're bringing the power to African Americans. I think you are almost shaping, landscaping African American spaces. Even separate from Africa or the Caribbean, but African Americans, obviously have a unique history of their own. So, with that in mind, what does African American soft power mean to you?
Well, in this case, I would say that it is speaking truth to power, and just not being afraid and not being apologetic about making a demand and making a claim for justice. It's about bringing all of the parties together. We hear about this concept of Pan-Africanism. And in this sense, I would say Pan-Africanism, real Pan-Africanism, when we have a real issue to resolve. So this soft power is showing people what we really have in common, and that it's not so easy, but sticking with it so that we can all reach a hopefully a positive outcome. At least that's the goal. So working together. Ultimately, that's what it's about.
I love it. Thank you so much. I want to also share an up and coming event, which maybe you'll be here and I'll get to meet you in person. The museum, the African American History and Culture Museum, they're having their hip hop block party on August 12th, celebrating Black culture and music and honoring 50 years of hip hop artistry. So it's happening on August 12th, and hopefully you'll be able to join. I'm not sure if I'll be there, but if you come, I'll certainly make a point to be there. But anyways, this was an absolute pleasure. In spite of the heaviness of the topic, in spite of its heaviness, it's so important and crucial that we maintain our knowledge of our history, especially the thorough history of slavery. And I want to thank you very much for helping us do that. And in many ways, really bringing about Pan-Africanism, as Marcus Garvey, also laid the blueprint for. So thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to add that I have not noted?
Well, what I would hope is that members of Congress would learn about this issue and possibly introduce a resolution to acknowledge the role that Africans who were enslaved in the Americas played in the making of these bronzes. I think that would just be very powerful because people do not know. And American Congress is paid attention to all around the world. So it would be a powerful statement from this country.
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris just announced a new plan, a new resolution to stop anti-Semitism. So we've had, anti-Haitian hate bill. We're now embarking on anti-Semitism bill. So hopefully this will be something that'll finally be on the books. But it took almost 100 years for the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill to become law. Hopefully it won't take another 100 years for this particular mission to come to fruition. So, any way I could support, I will. And I thank you again. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us for this important dialogue. Jeanette Lenoir with ePluribusAmerica, and this is Our American Culture.